Today's scripture reading will be Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. I will be reading from the ESV version. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house and walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your houses and on your gates. You may be seated.
Good job, bud. Good morning. So I just want to begin this morning by bragging on our youth group a little bit. This is the one time, so enjoy it, all right? We just got back Friday with a group of our high schoolers. We spent the week in Colorado for our mission trip, and I don't know if you know this. I don't know how much time you get to spend around our young people, but that right there is the finest group of young people you're going to find. They worked hard this week. They built relationships. It was a wonderful week, and I hope you as a congregation are proud of the young people that you are raising up. While we were on our trip, it was the very last night of our trip, and we go to a park, and the kids were off doing their thing, and I was sitting at a picnic table with Kevin Gates, and we were just talking about being parents, the challenges that come with being parents, the difficulties. A couple weeks ago, as Tim and I were talking about how I might use this time on Sunday morning while he was gone, I didn't want to get away from this idea of evangelism, but as Tim and I were talking, we both agreed that when we're talking about evangelism, which is just spreading the gospel, one area that we forget that falls in the category of evangelism is spreading the gospel to our young people. Passing our faith along to the next generation. And as Kevin and I sat there and talked just about being parents and the challenges that come with raising up kids that are faithful, it was hard for me not to think about the things that I want to talk about this morning. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, where we hear about this faith that's passed down to Timothy from his mother and from his grandmother. It says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now, I am sure, dwells in you as well. Sincere faith. I don't know about you, but that's what I hope for the next generation of Christians, is a sincere faith. When I think of the young people in our youth group, when I think of my own children and the children throughout this congregation and throughout the world, that's my hope, is that we are raising up young people who don't just go to church, who don't just try their best to do good things. I hope we are raising up young people who we can say have a sincere faith. And I think that we have a congregation here who hopes for the same. I think we have parents and grandparents and members and mentors who look at that younger generation, and that's our hope, is sincere faith. But if you are a parent, or if you spend any time with young people, you know this isn't easy. I told Kevin as we were sitting there at the park, I said, being a parent is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I like to think I've tried some hard things, but being a parent, it's hard. It's hard enough living in a world that we live in, trying to just raise kids who grow up to be alive, let alone raising kids who are good, sincere, honest Christians. And so if you're like me, you look at raising up this next generation, and it's challenging for you. And you may have nights where you lay in bed and you wonder, am I doing this right? Or you look back at mistakes you've made as a parent, and you think, I've messed it up, and it's too late. And so this morning, I want us to spend some time talking about what we can do as the church and as families and as parents to make sure our young people are growing up to have a sincere faith. Now, I'm not teaching on this because I am an expert parent. You can ask Carrie. I'm not. I'm working on it. But what I want to use is God's Word. Use God's Word as our template and help us grow together in understanding what it means to raise up young people who have sincere faith. And so we are going to spend some time in the passage that Austin just read for us in Deuteronomy. And I want to talk about a sincere faith, how we do that. Number one, sincere faith begins with love for God. I don't have an outline this morning. If you didn't just hear, I just got back from a mission trip, so be thankful you have a PowerPoint presentation. Sincere faith begins with love for God. If we want the next generation to obey God, we need to help them come to love God. I think we get this backwards sometimes. I think we feel like if we teach our kids enough about the rules of God, eventually they'll come around and they'll love God. But I don't know about you. I don't know any other relationship where it works that way. In a marriage, in a friendship, the reason we do good things for the person in that relationship is because we love them. We don't do the good things until we get to a point where that love shows up. And so the first part of the passage that we read here in Deuteronomy chapter 6 was incredibly important and is still incredibly important to Jewish people. This is a prayer that they refer to as the Shema. They call it that because the first word there, hear, or maybe in your translation, listen, is the Hebrew word Shema. So easy enough. And this is a prayer that Jewish people will pray every single day, both morning and evening. And so it is very important to their life. It is at the heart and soul of everything that they did as the people of God. And at the heart of the Shema, this prayer that they would pray is love for God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And so that should be at the very core of our faith, and the faith of our young people is love, which means sincere faith isn't rooted in rule keeping. Now, hang with me. And teens, if you think I'm letting you off the hook, I'm not. I'm not saying it doesn't involve rule keeping, but sincere faith is not rooted in just keeping rules. And it's not saying that that's not important. If you keep reading down in Deuteronomy chapter 6, you'll come down to verse 17, and he reminds them how important it is that they keep the commands and the precepts of God. But he doesn't start with that. He starts with love, because our obedience should flow out from our love. We do these things not because we've been told to do them. We do these things because those commands come from a Father that we love and we want to obey. And I think we spend too much time enforcing rules as the measure of our faith. We look at young people and we tell them that if they want to be good Christians, good followers of God, it's all about the rules. You got to keep the rules, and these are the things you do. And I've talked to parents who get frustrated because they can't seem to help their child understand the importance of keeping these rules. And I think often the problem isn't that they don't want to keep rules, they just haven't grown to love God. And it's hard to keep rules when there's no love. And so I hope when you look at your children and when you look at this next generation, you won't measure their faith by whether they show up to church, whether they come to Bible class every week, whether they do all the youth group activities. Our faith should begin with our love for God. It's not rooted in rule keeping. Sincere faith also isn't rooted in fear. I think this is how my faith started. As I look back on my teenage years, I think I became a Christian not because I loved God, but because I was afraid I was going to go to hell. And look, I think there's a place for fear. When you get down to verse 13 in Deuteronomy chapter 6, God tells us we should fear the Lord. There's a place for fear. But fear comes after love, and it's a healthy fear that understands that he's a good God and that he wants the best for us and that he's trying to protect us from ourselves. That's what those rules are for. But again, we too often in raising our kids, we try to use fear as the motivator. You drive down the highway and you see the billboard sign that says, if you die tonight, where will you spend eternity? Woo, I'm going to pull over right now, find a hotel and make sure they got a full swimming pool because I'm afraid. I need to get baptized right now in this very moment. And we do that. We use fear as the motivator, but I'm just telling you, fear is not a good motivator on its own. Look, it's important. I don't want to be on the wrong side of God's judgment when judgment day comes. But the motivation for what I do should not be fear. It should be love. Again, imagine any other relationship in your life. It was just rooted in fear. Carrie from the other room. Jeremy, would you help unload the dishwasher? Oh, wait a second. I think that is rooted in fear. Just kidding. It's love, right? Why does a mother sit up all night at the bedside of her child when they're sick? Not because they're afraid, because of love. And so, rule keeping is important. And fear of God is important, but that's not where faith begins. And if you're trying to instill sincere faith in your children, and that's where you're starting, you're going to find it to be very difficult. Because rules, they get boring or burdensome. And fear, eventually, if I decide I don't believe in what it is I'm afraid of, doesn't matter anyways. But if we instill love, it makes a difference. This is a passage in John chapter 14, verse 15. Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. There are two ways to read this passage. One is that if you want to show me that you love me, you better keep my commandments. It's a measurement. I'm not sure that's completely what Jesus is saying. I think that's part of it. But I think what Jesus is telling us is, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. If you really do love the Lord, naturally, you're going to keep his commandments. However, I think we teach the opposite. If you want to prove to God that you love him, it doesn't matter what's in here. You better prove it with your actions. That's all that commandments are for. And when we approach it that way, I appreciate that Jamie prayed in his prayer about God's commands not being burdensome, because that's exactly what it says here in 1 John 5, verses 2 and 3. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and obey his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not burdensome. And I think what John is saying is that when we have a faith that is rooted in love, when we love God and we love others, keeping his commands aren't burdensome. It's easy because I love these people and I love the Lord. And when love is at the center of everything we do, those things become so much easier for us. I can remember when Carrie and I first started talking in college, it was right around the time that OC was hosting their lectures, and she was getting up to go to an 8 a.m. lecture to get some extra credit for a class, and she said, do you want to go with me? And I'll tell you now, I love you. I did not want to go to that lecture. But guess what? I loved Carrie, and so guess what? It was easy for me to, every other 8 o'clock class I ever had, oh man, you had to drag me out of bed to get there. But Carrie invited me to go. You know what I did? I had my alarm set early, got up. I was looking good-ish. I was ready. Why? Because when love is at the heart of it, those things become easy. And so what I think John is saying is that if love is at the heart of what you do, God's commands don't feel burdensome. And here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that a lot of young people feel like God's commands are burdensome because we have made them a burden. Because that's all we emphasize. We don't talk about love, and we don't talk about the good things that God is doing for us and the way he's blessed us. We just push rules down their throat until the point they're like, I don't know how to do this. I feel like it's a burden. And so instead of just teaching rules, and please, again, I'm begging you as someone who helps with your kids, keep teaching rules. That's important. But teach them to love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Teach rules, but teach them as coming from a God who loves us and cares for us and would do anything for us. Talk with your kids about the ways that God has blessed them and taken care of them and been with them through their difficult times. Encourage them to follow God's commands, not because we're afraid to end up in hell, but because we want to please the one that we love. These spiritual disciplines that we've been looking at this year, participate in those spiritual practices together. Help them understand the value of just growing in our relationship with God, not so that He'll be pleased with us, but because that's how we just build that relationship with the God that we love. Sincere faith begins with love for God. I recently told someone I always stand here, so now I'm going to walk over here just so I can say I didn't just stand over there. I'm working on it. Sincere faith must first be seen in us. It has to. In verse 7, the Israelites are going to be told that they need to teach these things to their children. However, before they get to that point, this is what it says in verse 7. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Let me just tell you, you can't expect your children to be something that they're not seeing in you. I don't understand why my kids don't have a sincere faith. Well, what do they see in you? Well, I can't understand why I can't get my kids to make good decisions. Well, what do they see in you? And I don't just mean in your actions. I mean in the way you live your life, the way that you treat others, the way you talk to people, the way you talk about the church, the way you talk about spiritual things. If you talk about spiritual things, they see it. In the passage we saw in 2 Timothy, it says that sincere faith first dwelled in his grandmother and his mother. That's not a coincidence. It dwelt in Timothy because it first dwelt in them. He saw it and he practiced it. Look, I wish my kids just learned the things I taught them and not the things that I showed them. If that were the case, I wouldn't have gotten an email from one of my kids' teachers at school this year saying that my child had told a kid wearing a Lakers jersey that he was a loser. And they kindly explained, but that's what my dad does when he watched the Nuggets and Lakers game. Whoops. They're watching, right? Your kids are watching you. And not just children watching their parents, adults in this congregation, our teenagers and our young people are watching you. And you know what kids are really good at spotting? Hypocrites. People who say, do this, and they don't see it in you. Or they're really good at acting when they're in this place, but then when they go home, guess what? Mom and dad are somebody else. Or I've interacted with that person outside these walls, and they're not the same person. Kids see that. And so what we need to do is show them what sincere faith looks like. Not just teach them what it looks like, but show them. And so do they see a more than Sunday faith in us? Do they see a faith motivated by love? Do they see us practicing things just to be seen, or do they see us doing things because we love God? What do they learn from our actions and from our words and from our priorities, or the way we treat others, or the way we talk about others? Now look, this is not to say that we have to be perfect. Truthfully, I think our kids can learn more from us about the way we fail and the way we respond to that than the way that we always get things right. I make a lot of mistakes. And there is nothing more humbling than having to tell your 7-year-old, I'm sorry I lost my temper. I shouldn't have done that. But you know what? I want my kids to see that I make mistakes. And it's not just about always getting it right. It's about how we respond when we do make mistakes. And so do our children see repentance when we make mistakes? Have our children ever heard us say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that? Showing a sincere faith to our kids does not mean always getting it right. It means being genuine. And it means when we fall short and we make mistakes, we explain that, hey, we're human, just like you. Now look, sometimes because teenagers, plug yours, because your teenagers can be this way, they're going to, hold that against you. And they may take shots at you. I can remember being a teenager who thought I knew everything in the world, and when my parents would slip up, I was like, there's my silver bullet. Later on, I got that one. They'll grow out of that. But when you can be sincere and genuine and loving in the way that you respond to your mistakes, your kids are going to see that, and it's important to them. And so they will never grow to have a sincere faith unless it first dwells in us. Sincere faith begins with us. Thirdly, and look, I'm going to start stepping on some toes. I'm sorry. Sincere faith keeps God at the center of all. God isn't just the number one priority. He is the priority. He is everything in our life. And there are two parts to this passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that I think reinforce this idea. The first is in verse 4 where we just read, when he says, you should love your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. That's everything. All of me goes to God. That's it. I'm going to be fully committed to God. No other kind of God. No one else gets that love. He gets all of it. But the second part in Deuteronomy 6, verses 7 through 9, just listen to how thorough or how fully God's commands and God's ways enter into the lives of these people. He says, you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates. If you can't figure that out, that's everywhere. When you lie down, when you get up, everywhere you go, God's there. He's right there in front of you. And that's what our theme this year is all about. Everywhere we go, we take God with us. He's part of our life. I wish, sometimes when you're reading things for a theme like this, you forget who says what, but in one of the readings I was doing, they said, Christians need to stop talking about their spiritual life. You don't have a spiritual life. You have a life. Your whole life is a spiritual life. It's not something we put on when we come to church and we take off when we leave. This is who we are all the time. And as the Israelites made their way into the promised land, one of the biggest problems they faced is they didn't remove all the former residents from the land. They're still there. And as they intermarry with these people, guess what happens? They start to introduce these other gods into their life, these false gods. And it turned the Israelites' hearts away from God. And I think we frequently think as parents that it's outside forces that are trying to introduce those false gods into our children's lives. And I'm just going to tell you something this morning. And look, I know I'm going to step on some toes, but when you're 10 years in as youth minister, you just kind of start getting to the point. Sometimes it's not outside forces that are introducing those false gods. Sometimes it's us. Many of us claim that we want our children to have a sincere faith, but you know what we're doing? We are putting up every barrier we can to keep them from doing that. And look, I don't want to make it out to seem like all we should do all day is just sit around in the dark and read the Bible, and that's all you can do, that you can't have a life outside of these walls. But I'm just telling you, God better be the center of your child's life. He better be the center of your life, because if he's not, it's not going to happen for them. Matthew chapter 16, verse 26 says, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? I just want you to think about that for a second. You can put whatever you want in that blank. Anything. Anything you want for your child. What good will it be for someone to get the best grades, yet forfeit their soul? What good would it be for someone to make the team or be named first chair, yet forfeit their soul? What good would it be for someone to be popular or be wealthy or be athletic or get that full ride scholarship, yet forfeit their soul? I'm just telling you, it's not worth it. God's not looking to share the throne of your child's heart. And too many parents are setting their kids up for failure because we say we want God at the center of their life. That's not what we put at the center of their life. We push sports, and we push education, and we push extracurricular activities. And I'm not saying those things are wrong by themselves, but as soon as those things become the center of our child's life, we've got a problem. And there are people who are confused why their kids graduate and then walk away from the church, and they say, I don't know why, and I know why. It's because you created false gods in their life, and you never helped them grow into a sincere faith. Look, I'm stepping on my own toes too, all right? You should have worn your steel-toe boots this morning. But this is serious business. God's not looking to share the throne of your child's heart. Look, don't misunderstand me. Your kids can have a life. Your kids can play sports. Your kids can do other things. But God better be the center of everything we do. When Kevin and I were talking the other night, we talked about how easy it is to beat yourself up, to look at your mistakes and your failures and just be like, I messed up, it's too late now. And I'll just tell you, look, I'm the youth minister, I'm supposed to be acing this. I'm telling you, there are nights where I lay in bed and I think about the way I interacted with my kids or didn't interact with my kids, and I think, can I go back and try that again? However, Kevin said something, and it was so good for me to hear, and I think it'd be good for a lot of us to hear. Kevin talked about the idea that we're not in it alone. It's not all on me. I do make mistakes, and I'm not always the best dad, but I'm thankful that God's also at work. And so this morning, I'm not looking to beat up on people. I'm not looking to send people home feeling guilty as if the only way they can fix things is to be the perfect parent. We all make mistakes. Be encouraged in knowing that God is at work. And even though I can't change the past, I can do everything in my power and then allow God in His infinite power to make up for the rest. Look, it's a long week. I know I'm about to get emotional, so buckle up. I love those kids. And I want them to have a sincere faith. And I'll just tell you, I love those kids too. In church, we owe it to them to show them what sincere faith looks like. I know you saw what happened in the news yesterday. If you're just catching up or just waking up, we live in a broken world. And I'm just telling you, our only chance of a better future is not through politics or violence or vengeance. It's right there. Right there. But not if we don't do our job. And so parents, it's time to start taking it seriously and show our kids what sincere faith looks like. We don't have to be perfect, but be genuine and heartfelt. Show them what a man or woman of God looks like. Maybe this morning you're like me and you are trying hard, but there are nights where you just feel like, I'm getting it wrong. And you just need to be encouraged that keep doing your best and let God work. And maybe there's some of you, you've been working real hard on your kids, and I know some of you have been working real hard on your kids, and it feels like no matter what you do, they're just not interested. And my encouragement to you is don't give up on them. Don't give up on them. Keep showing them. Keep displaying sincere faith. If you want your child to have a sincere faith, though, they've got to see it in you. They've got to see it in you. And so maybe for you this morning, the change that needs to take place is an internal one. And it's time for you to start loving the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might, so that the next generation can see that in us and live out that same faith. Maybe that change needs to happen right where you are, but maybe this morning you want our prayers. Or maybe this morning you're ready to fully give yourself to God by repenting of your sins and confessing Jesus as Lord, and then putting him on in baptism and living a new life where he truly can be the Lord your God. Whatever your need, we want to invite you as we stand and sing this song.